Hello and welcome to Strengthening SOF's Mission Partner Interoperability, a dispatch from SOF Week 2024, brought to you by GDIT. I'm your host, George Jackson, with GovExec TV here on assignment in Tampa, Florida. The Department of Defense interacts and communicates with coalition mission partners and allies on a daily basis. To ensure mission success, that community needs to communicate, collaborate, and share sensitive or classified information in real time. The path forward relies on what the department calls Mission Partner Environments, or MPEs. Today, I'll sit down with SOF and industry leaders to talk about some of the opportunities and challenges that lie ahead. Joining me now, Colonel Simon McKenzie, CENTCOM J63 Operations Division Director. Sir, welcome.
Thank you so much for having me here. It's such a pleasure to sit here today with you. Thank you for this wonderful opportunity.
Absolutely, sir. Mike Hobaugh, he is MPCO, that's Mission Partner Capability Office, Liaison Officer to USSOCOM. Good to see you.
Thank you, George, for inviting me.
Next to him, Todd Rissinger. He is Operational Integration SME to the Program Executive Office and the MPCO, two hats. Welcome.
Thank you, George. Appreciate being here.
And always a pleasure to host Eric Tapp, GDIT MPE lead. Sir, good to see you again.
Great to see you as well, George. Happy to be here.
So, Colonel, kick us off here. J63, what is it? What are you setting out to accomplish?
Absolutely. So I have two different roles with dealing with that. So first, as the Chief of Network Operations, I'm in charge of monitoring those networks, making sure they're up and running. CENTCOM has a number of bilateral partnerships with the countries in the region. So we have a bilateral network with each one of those countries, which makes our job a little bit interesting on a daily basis. And then on top of that, then when countries that we don't have a relationship with, we will reach out to those countries to offer them this capability. So we can reach out to them to make sure we have a classified network to be able to coordinate any sort of communications or capabilities between the U.S. and that country.
Todd, you have a long, rich history in MPE dating back to the Cold War. Give me a sense of the evolution of this field and maybe where we are today.
So interesting enough is the discussion that we had earlier about in the current structure, we've done about 25 to 30 years of single theater, single threat counterinsurgency. Back in my earlier days, it was Cold War type. So now with the dynamics of the battle space today, we're moved into that broader environment for bigger region reach back and prosecuting multi-theaters, Cold War type environments. The initial instantiation of us moving down that path was originally with CENTCOM when we put the Afghan mission network together. And that was the first time that we actually had a coalition footprint in a single rail, but we had a coalition footprint where we could rapidly do command and control with our partners, 44 nations at the time, but 9 to 11 that were bringing their indigenous national kit to that fight. And we did a really good job in that area of moving that data within that theater, but it had shortfalls. It didn't have the cyber hygiene and, the things that are in today. So as that evolved out with efforts that Eric had run with CENTCOM, in lessons learned, is they put the collaborative partner environment together with the JIDC was the initial efforts, joint interoperability through data centricity. That has grown exponentially now, which is now the data-centric footprint for Zero Trust framework, which brings in the ICANN,
identity, credential, and access management,
and then the attribute-based access control for ABAC, and then how do you marry that together? For our purposes is that if you're going to rapidly move that data, you got to put that metadata wrapper and a protective wrapper on it, but not sacrificing the speed of need for the operational mission. And we've come a long way with that for MPE now, so that's evolved for the mission partner environment as governed by the DoD 8110. And then the corollary, that we don't mention much here, but to add that corollary is the Federated Mission Networking, which our mission partners, our national partners are actually following that. MP and FMN are pretty synonymous with each other. U.S. uses the MP nomenclature, but the nations use FMN. But they're all predicated on moving the data-centric security, data-centric functionality, and that's what MPE is now.
Mike, jump on that point because you mentioned the importance of data.
Yeah, I think what Todd was referring to there with the Afghan Mission Network was the fact that we've been for decades now network-centric, right? We each have our own network. We have a lot of networks out there, some number 55, some say 92 within just the DoD itself, of separate networks doing separate missions for the commands that own those networks. going into the DCS world, the data-centric world, now opens those up to being able to do collaborative interoperability and sharing that data, because it is all about the data. It's really not about the network anymore. And the mission partner environment is just a framework with which to operate within what you build, and then that data moves across that environment to share with partners.
Eric, you used a quote before we went on the air. I'm going to read it. I thought it was pretty cool. You said that you have scar tissue now on both sides, in government, now in industry. Talk about what you see as the current suite of challenges facing MPEs and standing it up in the right way.
Absolutely, yeah. So when I was still in uniform at CENTCOM working on the nascent CPE efforts, collaborative partner environment, we put a lot of time and effort into helping other DoD organizations understand where we could take the technology and how it can enable the warfighter. As we looked at what zero trust and data centricity could provide, from our perspective in the net-centric, static, rather slow nature of the networks, data centricity and zero trust provides that dynamic capability, that speed that the warfighters absolutely have going forward. And so I spent a lot of time just talking and almost to the point convincing a lot of folks of what's in the realm of the possible. And we made a lot of effort, and watching the mission partner interoperability series of exercises at Bold Quest continue on and grow has been great to see. So I knew as I left service, it was in a good place and the DoD was on a great path. Coming over to industry, that understanding was not there. The importance of MPE and to enabling a coalition to fight in a unified manner in a way that is going to be required to defeat peer and near-peer forces and foes. It just wasn't there yet. And so I made it part of my mission to continue what I was doing in uniform, out of uniform, and start to build a coalition, build understanding. Hey, this is what we're seeing in these regions. These are the challenges that the combatant commands are facing. And here's how they apply to our current customers, and here's how they apply to customers that we're talking to that may have some of these requirements, but we've got to help clarify where our capabilities meet their requirements.
Mike, I want to get to the interoperability aspect here shortly, because I think that's really important. But Colonel, before we get there, talk about how policy drives this in the right way. What has to happen from a policy perspective in order to organize things around MPE? Absolutely.
So great question for us. So things that we're working with other agencies, we have the Information Security Risk Management Working Group that's in DC that's really working closely with U.S. Central Command to help us shape policy to understand what a data-centric analysis of what a network looks like, how safe that can be, with just moving in from network-centric, where we're used to seeing very stovepipe, routers and switches and TAC lanes, to using technologies to help defend and protect the network. That's just a new technology, a new way, a new paradigm of looking at securing the network. So very, very good on them that they're working with us dynamically. NSA has been a very good partner with U.S. Central Command to make sure that we understand what is needed to truly protect and evaluate the network. So that's something that's never really existed before. And with the help of leaders like General Kurilla and the CTO and the Chief Technology Officer, the Chief Data Officer of USCENTCOM, really putting all of our eggs in a basket to make sure that we are looking forward in the same direction has been really helpful in understanding and driving policy change. And that policy change will hopefully be our CENTCOM's contribution to the combined joint all-domain command and control framework of understanding how we can work with partners in the future. So again, the joint all-domain command and control, we had scar tissue of just being able to talk to each other internally between the services, but now including the partners, that's going to open up a whole new ability of us to be able to do things around the world. Partners are partners that are so key to how we do things. Just even now in the region, without their assistance and their support, we're not able to do things to the scale that we need to, going alone in the world. So having policy support that initiative is extremely helpful.
Mike, something stood out to you in Eric's remarks. What was it?
And I'd like to dovetail on what Colonel has said as well, because that interoperability with our partners is key. And what NSA is doing is key as well, as they protect our national networks and everything with the policies they put in place. We have to understand we're in a SecRail environment, so secret releasable environment. We've talked a lot about how the U.S. we always communicate within the U.S. We don't have real issues with that. Even with network-centric systems, we can communicate across the DoD because we're at a common secret or above level. When you start bringing in our partners, now we have a releasable issue we have to deal with, a security issue we have to deal with. And this is where we're talking about. When we talk about the mission partner environment, partner is key. And the key to that is the security classification you put on that, and that is secret releasable. So depending if it's a bilateral relationship or a multilateral, a coalition, we have to understand that the things that we're putting in place right now is meant for a mission partner environment that is at the secret releasable level. Some of that might be higher depending on who our partners are, but primarily at that level. So the networks that we're putting together, the environment we're putting together, I should say, and the ability to release that and make it interoperable is make sure we include our partners in it at that level. The information that we're writing to should be written to the secret releasable level, and it should be then wrapped in, as Todd has mentioned, that data wrapped at the appropriate levels and passed along because it has those credentials around it that are releasable to our partners.
Todd, you look ready to jump in there.
I was going to say is that along with the growing pains scar tissue, as you had said, we moved from a network-centric environment into more of a data-centric environment, but equally we're moving away from a system-centric approach into a data-centric approach. So the idea is that while the systems and the technology is important, being interoperable is like the bigger critical piece on the battlefield. To Mike's point, if we're operating in a mission-rel environment, sharing that data rapidly with your partners is important. And when you have to move that through, any type of manual transfers or not to say that cross domains are bad, but cross domains generally have their limitations when you have to move a lot of data rapidly. But more from the specifics is with our partners is to be able to receive that data. On a system-centric approach, each nation generally isn't going to buy a U.S. system. They're going to have their own vendors build their system. What we've looked at from a data-centric perspective and getting back to policy and doctrine is that if we can establish the firm business rules that are trans-regionally standardized and all of the partners agree to that, they can have their own vendor build it as long as they're building it to the processes within the mesh federation that everybody agrees to. And that's where the interoperability piece comes in. Data centricity has helped us a lot with that with zero trust, and partners have agreed to that. Now we're going down and in and looking at the command and control aspect of moving that data. We're very good at moving that on the east and west side on the battlefield at the tactical and operational level. Not so much when we're moving it up into the bigger enterprise cloud type stacks. So now we have to factor that data piece in and how do we protect it, but how do we also rapidly move it? So the data-centric approach in the business process is what's really been doing leaps and bounds for the advancements of MPE over, I'd say, the last 2 or 3 years now. It's been making good progress.
Eric, I should probably mention we're here in Tampa. It's SOF week. They're practicing for a capabilities demonstration that happens tomorrow. So we're hearing boats, helicopters, drones, a couple of audience cheers in the background, other things. We've alluded to this at certain points through our conversation, but I'd like to call it out specifically, the benefits on the other end to the U.S., to its allies and partners. What are those? What are the benefits of doing MPE right?
I mean, as you can see, and maybe it's coming through on some of the video, the aircraft coming through the air, our special operators on the water, infiltrating from different manners. We have land forces as well. A very dynamic environment, and this is just a small snapshot of what happens at the tactical level. Now, spread that across the theater of operation and multiply that by dozens and possibly hundreds of tactical engagements, and that information all flowing back to operation through operational channels, and then ultimately up through strategic, and then a bi-directional flow of information feeding these forces so that they know when they complete this activity, they're going to move on to the next and engage the next enemy. All of that done in a coalition environment makes that inherently more difficult because of the way that we manage our data currently. So the criticality of getting data management and data exchange and data sharing right is demonstrated here at the tip of the spear. It's got to be fast. It's got to be dynamic. It's got to be reactive at speed of relevance and operations to the warfighter's needs, or else we are going to be hindering our warfighters because of data processing.
Sure.
Yes, I want to add one more thing. So that what we see outside the result is a direct result of the information that we share. And things that I'd like to make sure that I want to impart on those listeners is that things that help us do our job is one is that we have automatic processes interfaces, so APIs. If I don't have an API in order to move data from siloed products, I can't do my job. Right? So information that stays in one piece of software doesn't help us. It doesn't help us do what we need to do to support the warfighter. Two, if I don't have software that's enabled with I'll call it 3 types of access control: attribute-based access control, classification-based access control, and role-based access control. If those aren't enabled on every piece of data that's in that piece of software, we can't move it at the speed of need across the networks to the appropriate partner at the right time. Because then we'll go back to, do we have a foreign disclosure officer to look at a piece of information? Then can we upclass it and move it? And now we've moved to seconds to minutes and hours. And that type of speed, or lack of speed thereof, is going to not enable what we see going on behind us. So being able to have an aircraft to see a target come up on their piece of software, or to have that target come up on a U.S. aircraft that's flying with a partner aircraft from a different country, and they know who has the ability who has the payload on their aircraft to be able to prosecute that target. If they don't have the ability to share that information real time, then we're not enabling what's going on behind us and those individuals on the ground that are training every day to keep our country safe. So what I need from the industry is to help us that we have a policy here at CENTCOM where we say, if I can't get the data out of it, if it doesn't have an API, we have to seriously take a second look before we bring it into our enterprise. If it doesn't have the ability to read tags, like data tagging, to be able to take into account those 3 types of access control, we have to take a serious hard look on if we really want to bring that into the enterprise to be able to do what we need to do. It goes all the way from at strategic level to planning, all the way down to tactical execution. If I can't tag a piece of data, someone's got to manually do it, and then we have to and then move it down accordingly. Goodness forbid, I'm not even going to talk about the misclassification of data. We're not going to talk about that. But the first problem I have is I can't tag it because there's terabytes and petabytes of data that we're going back as a within the Department of Defense of just classifying that data. And so that's a backwards looking issue, but just moving forward, I need that data tagged, and I need to be able to move that data at the speed of need.
Mike, you called it a single pane of glass.
Earlier, so that you have, everything ties in together into one view so that you can move data from one network, one partner into a community of interest to another partner. So it's speed. It's about what the Colonel said. We can't operate at the speed of war today, and General Fenton mentioned that this morning in his opening speech. We have got to be fast, right? Fast and far. And data, the way we're talking about it right now in the MPE, that's going to get us there. We've got to ride that train to fast and far with our partners. So I'm going to bring our partners back into the conversation. You know, the Colonel's working in an AOR with numerous partners in there and coalitions that have been going on for over 20 years. SOCOM has and embedded in their command. And SOCOM has 27 partners embedded in the command, and it has global reach across all the combatant commands. So when you look at who we're dealing with, right, from that combatant command perspective, it's much larger. It is global in nature, and every one of those partners have a role to play and need to be educated and brought into this fold to get to these standards that we're talking about, right? We need to help them give the template, and CPE through CENTCOM has provided a lot of that template for a lot of our partner nations who are now coming into the fold to be within the MPE that we're talking about.
Todd, we've covered a ton of ground on policy, on organization, on potential benefits and challenges. I want to draw us to something tangible for a moment. You mentioned the Afghan Mission Network and how transformative that was for this concept, giving you a chance to put it into practice. If you could talk for a moment about that and what it's resulted in.
So it's interesting from the Afghan Mission Network, going back to what we had talked about earlier, is the cylindrical networks. U.S. would show up to a fight and it would be U.S. And if we had any partner, they were a hosted partner on something that we provided, but generally they'd be sort of on the outside of the tent looking in, I guess is the analogy. From the Afghan Mission Network aspect of it is that it was a very dynamic theater at that time, and we were growing to be able to rapidly move data across that entire area of operations, which is pretty vast if you've been to Afghanistan. Getting back to Mike's point is that when we first started putting things together is that I operated in the J2 aspect there, and I had 7 computers on my desk. which I had separate logins to get on each one of them. So a single pane of glass is kind of a good idea for an operational person. The AMN started tightening that up where we had a core capability that all the nation partners federated to. As I mentioned earlier, although that was network-centric cylindrical release at that one time, one rel, the concept of that has expanded exponentially. So where CENTCOM has gone, operational imperative is the reason that they drove in a direction that they did, because they have the need. Obviously, there's a lot of activity in their AOR. And then with the data-centric aspect that we work with Eric back on by advancing that out of the Afghan mission network, is that when you start bolting that together to rapidly move data, but then looking at where the shortfalls were. So the shortfalls were having that single pane of glass. The AMN didn't necessarily have that, even though it was one rel, but you still had a NATO computer to log into and a U.S. computer to log into and so on and so forth. Now, with the aspects of the mission partner environment, data-centric, zero trust, having that single pane of glass is that instead of having a single rel that's physically separated, now they're logically separated. So now I can build one big network instead of care feeding and watering for multiple networks. I can have one big network that's better on an O&M budget, but easier to maintain. And then when you have partners that are going to come into it, they're coming into that specific business process rule environment. So now they're federating into that one bigger network with their national instantiation. And you have that broader reach and reach back. And it is a single pane of glass. And that's where the term communities of interest come in. So, you could have a release agreement that was done embassy to embassy, but in a network-centric, that's just for that specific realm. Under data-centric, you can still have that either bilateral or multilateral release agreement, but now those can be logically separated based on the security mechanisms that the Colonel had talked about and what we mentioned here is with that payload wrapper. I can move that data, but based on everybody's identity access control on who they are, I can validate who that person is, but I can also validate their need to know to access that information, and that's married up within the metadata. So the AMN was a good baseline to get to where we are, and we learned a lot from it, but we've evolved that significance to where we are today. And that does get us after not only LOE1 for CJADC2, as the Colonel mentioned, which the data piece, 3 is the integration aspect of that, and then more specifically from our side of this for the integration is LOE5, that's mission partner data share.
Yep.
So to move that within that purple pink type environment for mission partners, I call it mission, security system type thing or mission rel, is that in order to rapidly move that, if you talk to any warfighter, even the ones that are operating today, they don't operate in a singular package. They operate in a coalition package as soon as they jump out of a plane or hit the ground. So they need to move data very quickly, not only on pre-planning, but execution, and then also your after action reports. And to rapidly share that, as Eric had mentioned, is it, kind of rinse and repeat, you're going right back out for another battle. So there's another set of information that you have to rapidly share. And I think that's where the evolution came, that we did a lot of lessons learned from the AMN, and we've evolved that significantly to where we are today.
Eric, I promise I'm going somewhere with this question, but just bear with me. I want to give you a little context beforehand, okay? This is a sprawling field. You've got the Department of Defense, DOD, CIO, you've got the 3-letter agencies, you've got all of the services, and then you've got the Five Eyes and other mission partners out there around the world. It's international. It's a big space, and it's super complicated. What about when you layer on artificial intelligence? As Colonel McKenzie mentions, CJADC2 is, a dotted line to mission partner environments. Ultimately, agencies are going to want to take all that data, leverage it in the right way, get faster insights and better informed information out to the tip of the spear. How do you take AI and simplify MPE? How do you make it easier and more effective?
Well, step one is get to some level of data standardization. Once we have some standardized data that we can use broadly, I think that sets the stage for us to be able to implement artificial intelligence. And I think it's going to be down at the user level, because when you talk about machine-to-machine exchanges, so long as the data is curated, it can be collated, and it can be used at an appropriate speed, machine-to-machine speed, and it will most likely already be at a point where it's been tagged and it's been marked with the appropriate classification of releasability. But what about it when it's at the origin origin point where the human is interacting with the data set. I think that's where we'll have the ability to leverage some AI tools to help enhance a person's ability to ensure that they're writing full releasability and classifying things appropriately. Because a lot of times we'll default to what we know is good and won't get us in trouble. Sending an email, hey, what you doing for lunch? Secret no for 1 cent. Just because one, it's the easiest, it's what's at the top. And two, I know there's no chance in the world that there's going to be anything that any blowback comes against. But in this environment where we're working daily with partners and everything that we do is releasable to some extent, the users have to be cognizant of the different agreements that are in place. Whether it's you're sharing across a bilateral agreement or with a larger coalition in a multilateral agreement, there's going to be different rule sets and different types of information released. So having a machine augment a human in making those decisions and ensuring that things are protected appropriately once it gets into the DCS space, once it has those that metadata wrapper and those policy-based access controls applied to it, we know that it is marked appropriately and protected appropriately and shared appropriately, which is really the most important aspect.
Mike, I'd like to talk about cloud a little bit relative to that answer. As MPCO liaison to USSOCOM, what do you see relative to the cloud, the way that it's architected, the way that it's structured? What adjustments need to be made there, and what do you need from industry to do it so that you can leverage exactly what he's talking about?
George, you've probably reached my limit of what I know technically. I would say I know the cloud, not just the ones outside, but they will be able to be interoperable, depending on who owns the cloud. And that's some of the challenges today is which cloud are we using? There's multiple types of clouds out there who own those clouds. But beyond that, really, for me, that's something that really is in Todd or the colonel's lap, I would say. So.
I would say that the cloud technology is that people tend to look at what you can access on your cell phone or Twitter or Facebook or YouTube or whatever, and technically you're hitting a cloud to be able to get access to that, because I could watch YouTube here, fly to Afghanistan and watch the same YouTube thing over there. I'm just hitting a different pipe to get into it. I think the challenges and stuff with the cloud is that while we leverage the advances made in the commercial world, which is outstanding, in the militarized application, there's a bit of a tweaking you have to do on that based on the releasability and the classification of that data. And general commercial clouds aren't set up for that. It's easier when you're Facebook or Amazon when you do it, because essentially you own that entire environment. Mm-hmm. Interesting enough, on the cloud on the DoD side, we don't really own any of it. We're kind of leasing that market space. So when you're taking your bigger networks or you're taking your fixed infrastructure that you have as standalone, like CPE, for instance, CPE can operate, the term we use is connected to the bigger mesh or the mothership, if you will, but CPE can operate autonomously whether they're connected up to the bigger enterprise or not. And then the forces below them can still connect, down below that. So they can operate in a DDIL type, disconnected, degraded environment. When you get into the cloud app absolutely brings in the reach and reach back that we're looking for, but we still have some lessons learned on how we're going to leverage that. Plus, to your point earlier on the funding model, that doesn't come free. Yeah. So, on the DoD, anybody that's operating in the DoD understands we have an O&M budgets for operational management and sustainment that we have to factor into our budget decisions. So while using the cloud is great, it gives you reach back, we have to factor that in. And then, how to leverage that. But equally, I think there's advantages we're making in the data-centric and zero trust world that'll actually inform the commercial cloud side too. So I think there's a handshake there to be made. So, they can leverage us and we can leverage them.
Eric?
George, I just wanted to jump in. I think cloud also reinforces the AI perspective and the AI aspects. From a scalability perspective, you're not going to be able to train those AI algorithms on correct. Certainly having access to those resources and having access to companies that are doing this on a daily basis, once we are able to bring that data into an environment where we can start to make some sense of it and train algorithms against those different data sets so they can then be deployed to be employed maybe in an on-prem or in a tactical environment. But I think cloud is definitely going to enable the more broad use of AI across the board.
Colonel, I'm going to ask you, to close our discussion by being a futurist, okay?
Okay.
Where are we going to see MPE in 3 years, 5 years down the road? What is this going to look like?
Down the road, we'll have one network through multiple combatant commands. We'll all have the same one. We will all pitch in monetarily to hopefully to pay for this. Two, we will be using technologies like artificial intelligence and machine learning to not only defend the network, to be able to identify signatures of advanced persistent threats around the world that are essentially trying to do us harm. And we will have a joint model, so across all services agreeing. And I believe that the services are working towards that. And I believe in 3 years, they will be able to do that. We will be able to work closely with industry. I see industry offering new solutions on a regular basis, being able to contribute new technologies to be able to get after the 192 controls that are required to have a true zero trust environment. So what I see is an even closer partnership with the industry to be able to use not only the talent they have to bring to bear, but the intellect, the technology, and the speed of being willing to fail with us to fail forward in the future. And I see that partnership growing every day. We have fellow teammates that have come out of uniform that go into the defense sector to help us understand how we can work together. Where before, I think that there was maybe some space there, but now in 3 years, I do not foresee any space between industry and the Department of Defense moving forward and protecting and providing that technology to the Department of Defense, which has been a very special relationship to watch, that we've been tied closer and closer together moving forward. And so just a shameless plug for the command. General Kurilla has a three-pronged attack on how he looks at this, through people being, of course, the most important commodity that anyone has, through the partnerships that we have across the AOR. And then we like to see ourselves as, with our partnership with Special Operations Command, as commands of innovation, where innovation is going to lead us forward and is going to be able to make all this a reality moving forward. So I see us becoming steady state, and that hopefully that the CPE and MPE will be old hat, and we're already moving towards something else. So moving forward, that's where I see us in 3 years. We'll be talking about conversations like this about the challenges that we had, and then we'll be talking about more challenges in the future, thinking about how to work with quantum computing, or the new technologies and wearable technology, and how do we make sure that a service member down the road is wearing the newest generation of Apple goggles and he has the right classification on his face. So that's what we'll be dealing with, problems of how to wear technology versus how to defend it and how to just provide it to the edge.
Fascinating conversation as helicopters come behind us on set here with Colonel Simon McKenzie, CENTCOM J63 Operations Division Director, Mike Hobaugh, he is MPCO Liaison Officer to USSOCOM, Todd Rissinger, Operational Integration Subject Matter Expert to the PEO and MPCO, and Eric Tapp, GDIT MPE Lead. Gentlemen, thanks so much for your time.
Thank you.
Thanks, George.
To all our speakers, thanks for joining us, and thank you, the audience, for tuning in. I hope you walk away from today's conversations with a few notes about how Special Operations Forces are communicating with mission partners, embracing technology, implementing and improving mission partner environments. For GovExec TV, on assignment in Tampa, Florida at SOF Week 2024, I'm George Jackson. Have a great day.
Dominance on the modern battlefield requires interoperability with global mission partners. The strength of the coalition is what will ensure the security of our nation and partner nations well into the future. For decades, GDIT has led DoD's most complex mission partner environment challenges. Our experience has enabled critical capabilities in peacetime and in conflict. And the mission is dynamic, requiring sharing at the speed of operations. At GDIT, we deliver strategic and tactical solutions that harness zero trust to enable the future of warfighting, spanning network and data-centric capabilities at all levels of classification, and ranging from the most stable to the most austere environments at the tactical edge. The future of MPE is responsive, adapting to evolving requirements, secure, and available when our warfighters need it most. GDIT, secure collaboration on a global scale.